Hey everybody, welcome to Monday Momentum for December 20th to 24th. I'm going to experiment with a bit more video content creation over the next few posts. Let me know what you think. Should be a decent amount of new content creation coming out of me with the kind of slowness of the holiday season here. I'm going to try and take advantage to make more. Other big focus of this week is activating a new client that we were able to sign last week. Really excited about their mission to democratize decentralized finance. So providing a better user experience, principally through a user interface, to get users like myself better understanding, better visibility to what they're doing in DeFi. And for those of you out there who have, like myself, gone down that rabbit hole and run the experiments, or flat out made pretty material investments into the tools and the contracts and the assets that are running through DeFi, managing these things is not simple. That's why the vast majority of activity is on individual books and not a material amount of fiduciary capital yet is in the space, because accounting for it is challenging. There's not the reporting tools. There's a bunch of data challenges with how do you pull, how many different liquidity pools do I have assets in, what assets do I have in them, what's the slippage on those pools, what's the impaired loss on the pools. Pulling all that data together is a Google sheet, even for, I think, the most sophisticated amongst us in the DeFi space. So that creates a huge gap, first, for fiduciary capital. So if you're running other people's money, whether it's shareholder money, limited partners money, client money, however that transpires, where you're responsible for somebody else's money, giving them accurate accounting, and then more importantly, more challenging, an accurate view of the risk return profile of the portfolio is really challenging. And I think a really big, exciting opportunity, because the last build phase that we were in the decentralized space was kind of the 2016 through 2018-19. The run up that Bitcoin to 20,000 in that phase, and then all the altcoins, including Ethereum and whatever else that came in underneath that, created a bunch of excitement. But it made the institutions aware, made fiduciary capital aware of, Bitcoin is an asset that we cannot ignore. If we want to make our bonuses and satisfy our stakeholders, we need to figure out how to get to Bitcoin, which drove a ton of activity around back office. Back office and mid office got built out for Bitcoin. Ethereum kind of got dragged along behind it. For the more risky in those fiduciary capital allocator buckets, but Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy and sovereign wealth funds and pension funds are now allocating some percent, 500%, as Michael Saylor would indicate, all the way down to 1% or 0.05% for a pension fund or what have you. They're allocated into Bitcoin because all the right infrastructure is in place so that those fiduciaries, those operators, can report back and go, here's exactly the situation, the portfolio risk and portfolio performance that you have, and pretty much in near real time. DeFi is nowhere near there. I can barely keep up with how am I allocated as an individual with I followed the good financial advice of I'm not over allocated the money I can't afford to lose. In terms of the principal that's been invested in there, there's not a bad amount of return sitting in there that requires more thought than what the principal does. But reporting on it, understanding, is the liquidity pool on SushiSwap that I'm in more risky than Uniswap? It is, but how do I quantify that? What data needs to be pulled to pull that together to go, here's the risk associated with being on SushiSwap versus being on Uniswap. Here's the risk associated with being on Binance Smart Chain versus being on Ethereum Layer 1. Here's the risk you might be in if you're on Uniswap on top of Arbitrum versus Uniswap on top of Ethereum layer 1. All these things have different risk profiles. Quantifying, pulling them together to articulate what those are, that there you can and then measure against, well, I just saved a bunch in gas expense. Was the gas expense savings on a risk-adjusted basis a good return? Or did I increase my risk so much that I should have spent the $200 on gas versus the $2 on gas to cover that off? So building interfaces in the data in the mid-office and the back office around that is really a big opportunity. And the output can be, much more like a robo-advisor like interface of, what does my portfolio look like? How do I rebalance my portfolio to get it in line with the risk and return boundaries that I can set as a user, whether I'm a fiduciary user or individual user? If I'm perfectly happy making 8% at very low risk, there's a different play to that. If I want to make 100% APY on my assets, I got to take more risk, but I need to be able to see it and understand where it is. So that's a really fascinating opportunity. I think that is going to where the puck will be in 2023, 24. After we go through the crypto winter that will hit here at some point. The build phase will be, how do we get institutions into DeFi? And that infrastructure is going to be extremely, extremely valuable because there's much more value to be unlocked there. It's productive capital, which is where capital wants to be. Other big piece of the week is going to try and do a bit more of a deep dive on play to earn. So understand the Axie Infinity ecosystem a little bit better, all the other games that kind of look like that, where investors can accumulate assets, so game assets, whether they're characters, skins, tools, swords, whatever they are, and then lease them out to players. And typically those players are in places like the Philippines, Malaysia, India, where they get trained, then they get 50% of the earnings that come off those assets. So I can own I own Zen Run horses. My leasees are my daughters who like to play race the horses, so I get them, here you go, and if they earn on those horses, I buy them more horses. I'm much happier buying them digital horses on the metaverse than I am real horses in reality. So, sorry to my sister-in-law who would love for them to get into actual real horses. So understanding that play to earn ecosystem and where the opportunities are there is another kind of focus. So if you're into that space, I'd love to connect with you and learn a bit more. And why it's interesting is not the gaming. I'm not a gamer. Yeah, I've played, but I'm not into it. It's how do you use gamification to create more productive outcomes? So if we can figure out these gaming layers where they're explicitly games, we can start to use those gamification game mechanisms into how do I drive people towards, in a fun way, in a involuntary way, contribute more productivity to more impact, to do their jobs better, to take actions better, all that kind of good stuff, but do it in a gamified way. So I think a really important finding that there's a thread there. Other big piece is working with my current projects, Factor Chain, and our connection into the seamless supply chain community, as well as the OpenXO community, and looking at DAO structures, where to land the DAOs, how to invest behind DAOs to make them work and decentralize them in an appropriate way while generating the business outcomes that fundamentally they're built to do. So kind of getting that balance of centralization, decentralization is a really interesting stat, and then all the kind of the legalese that kind of have to go on in that, which offshore domicile is the best to sit your foundations and what IP goes where and all that kind of good stuff will be a bunch of interesting questions, which hopefully I'll be able to share more about in the not too distant future. And then it's really about, the challenges of getting deals done in the space of, like, you see the capital flying around really loosely, but getting an investor intention to lock them into the conversation to get them to allocate that capital is real hard work because there's so many bright, shiny objects and so much deal flow out there. It's been a challenging process to keep the thread going and pull people through to the table to get deals done. And then it's really want to highlight, the last video I made may have been the last words my grandfather ever heard were me talking about him in November. So encouraged me to do more video.